Hello, and welcome to the Journeys of Folco Hornblower, the One Ring 2nd Edition Strider Mode adventure, written and narrated by me, Ryan Hewlett. Book 3, Chapter 1. The road from the south gate to the main portion of the Great East Road was well maintained, as far as roads go in Eriador. The dirt and gravel that made up most of the road heading east was packed down well, with the frequent foot and cart traffic entering and leaving Bree from the likes of residents of Archet, Staddle, and Combe. The road had also become more hardened by the now falling temperatures of the cool night air, and the deciduous trees now turning shades of lighter green to light yellow, signaling autumn has finally arrived. Folco, with Billy at his side, like a trusted friend, walked eastwards, taking in as much of the sights and sounds of the Breeland, for who knows how long he will be away this time. The road east to the Misty Mountains, and evidently to Rivendell, somewhere in the valleys and foothills beyond the furthest river, Folco found out at least a 20-day walk, if it all went well. He figured a month was a safe bet, especially if something caught his eye along the way, or worse, he met those that would show ill will towards him. He was more careful and cautious now about those he would meet on the road, after his harrowing experience with the Southerners on the North Road. That was his plan, at the least. Billy, keep to your eyes and ears, and I to mine, and we shall reach Rivendell together. Folco said aloud, Billy neighing in agreement. The weather was fair, the wind was soft and cool, and no incident occurred to make Folco or Billy wary of the trip so far. As the sight of Bree Hill and the great Chetwood to the north began to fade from view behind him, the topography steadily falls ever lower, and the damp, boggy quagmires that make up the Midgewater marshes borders the road to the north. Folco has heard stories of tall and short folk alike getting lost in the Midgewater, and no one, even the most experienced hunter, had been able to find traces of any creature to enter or leave, the ever-shifting pools and patches of reeds and rushes changing constantly. A handful of nights passed and Folco spotted something that caught his eye to the south of the road, where the ground was higher and drier than that of the marshes. Folco had of course seen evidence of the era before now, the ancient kingdoms of men, but this ruin caught his eye especially. Bidding Billy to wait on the edge of the road, Folco walked towards the half-covered pile of worked stone, mere stone's throw away. Amongst the dense thicket of brambles, Folco saw what the stone was, a fallen statue of a king of old, for the kings of men ruled this land not so very long ago. Folco remembered hearing tales told of the pony, of Arnor and the later Cardillan. Folco brushed his hand against the now weathered stone and marveled at its craftsmanship. Nothing in Bree compared to what he had saw. What is this? Is that Athelas? Folco carefully took out his hunting knife, and cutting away at the overgrowth, and then carefully digging out the roots, Folco smiled, for he felt blessed by the day so far that he should find such a thing as kingsfoil, a weed most commonly thought of by most. Folco's grandfather always bid him, if he ever found it, to always find a way to take some, lest you are in need of something to heal the most grievous of wounds. Folco carefully wrapped the herb with a spare handkerchief, and placed it in his pack, only to spot another growing kingsfoil just out of sight. Had he not pondered the history of the statue, or the sight of the kingsfoil itself, he surely would have missed it. 4 days now have passed, with a few dwarves passing by on their way west to the Blue Mountains. Neither they or Folco stopped to chat. Folco suspect of anyone now traveling the roads. The dwarves suspect of a lone hobbit with a pony traveling away from Bree. Folco thought after that they may have figured he was a wandering spirit, for very few hobbits traveled out of the hearth and home, let alone by themselves. He smiled and chuckled, and looked to Billy. Well, Bree hobbits are your typical Shire hobbits now, aren't they, Billy? And who's to say that I'm alone anyway? A Breelander and his pony is a force to be reckoned with, I tell you that. Cresting over one of the numerous hills, Folco spotted it, not so far ahead, a long-ago crumbling tower. Now overgrown and weathered, the ruins lay perched on the top of a hill just off the road. He had heard of this place, from passing travelers from the east, from rangers talking of it whenever he was able to eavesdrop on a conversation, about the old ruined tower called Weathertop. Rangers use it to see far off into the horizon, spotting danger wherever it may lurk. Or ill-intended men use it to ambush unsuspecting travelers on the Great East Road, stealing their wares and treasures. Rumors in Bree speak of the ruins being haunted, but fortunately for Folco, he was passing the ruins later in the afternoon, and the sun would set, bringing forth the darkness of the night, much later after he was out of sight of it. Folco kept the tower in view as he passed, keeping an eye to anything that seemed out of place, moving, unnatural, and as he passed, and although he saw or heard nothing, the eerie feeling of someone watching was ever present. Large stones, remnants of a long-ago crumbling archway, crossed the road, flanked either side of the road. And as the sun was low in the western sky, the light brought out the now weathered, but once majestic images of Elrond and Isildur on the stonework. After a short pause to take in the sight, Folco kept going. His main focus was to get to Rivendell without a moment to spare, as he wanted to get back to Bree before the winter settled in and the snow blanketed the countryside. No time to spare, he thought. Just at that moment he saw it. He wasn't sure at first if he was imagining things, or if the now low-lying clouds and wind through the trees and brushes were playing tricks to his eyes and ears. But Folco saw over on one of the hills to the south a fair and beautiful creature, a woman. He wasn't quite sure. Accompanying the woman were a handful of children at play, uncaring to the harsh wild around them. Despite the darkness of the late afternoon, the encroaching clouds, or the dim light of the cast by the setting of the sun, a soft and fair light seemed to emanate from all around them. Folco stood, mesmerized by the sight, his ears now hearing the soft, soothing sounds of singing from the woman and the playing laughter of the children. He stood, stared at the sight. Like a cloud in the sky, gently moved its way westward. Time seemed to stand still, and the air around Folco felt that much warmer than before. The darkness that had been draped over his mind and body since the encounter with the nameless thing like a thin shawl seemed to disappear. A renewed sense of hope came over Folco, knowing that good still was out there in the wild, that light still could overcome the darkness, and that not everything was made of evil. With a gust of a brisk wind from the north, the woman and children faded away from sight, but not before the woman looked back to Folco, smiling and bowing before him. Folco still felt its glowing warmth and smiled, but now realizing the lateness of the afternoon, felt it was time to set up a small camp for the night. Folco awoke into a blanket of heavy, dense fog. The air was quiet, just the sound of Folco and Billy breathing and moving about camp. The dampness was a bit biting, and a chill Folco felt deep into his bones. Let us start a fire. At least a little warmth and some tea will help bolster our spirits, Billy. Folco panned about, and keeping in close eye to the fire as much as the fog allowed, his face showed a sign of concern. He had no idea in which direction the road lay, nor any direction he was facing. He looked for his tracks into the refuge he created last evening, but none he could find. Sitting back down and having a light breakfast, and a sip of warm tea, Folco looked around hoping something would trigger his memory, and he'd remember where the road lay, but nothing came to him. Cleaning up and dousing the fire with some dirt, it finally dawned on him. Billy! Billy would know where the road is. As any Breelander knows, ponies of the Breeland have the uncanny ability to find their way back home. And all this time and you didn't say something? Just waiting for me to ask, weren't you? Well, lead the way to the road. You know where it is. Billy neighed and nodded, and with half huff, a laugh Folco waggered, Billy started to trot amongst the broken boulders and low brushes. Hopefully, Folco thought, to the road. Sure enough, after about a few hundred feet, Folco's feet were on the Great East Road once again. The fog remained thick for the remainder of the day and well into the next, and it wasn't until the late evening of the 7th day into his journey to Rivendell that the fog dissipated and the clear skies of autumn were coming into view. The road had been empty. No other travelers or caravans either met or overtook Folco, but he wagered not many would travel under such conditions. He continued along the road and figured his pace of reaching Rivendell in 3 weeks was attainable, but something sullied his spirits. As a marker showing the midway point between Bree and the last bridge, he had just reached. He had hoped he was well past this mark by now, but nonetheless he would continue on his journey, stopping only when absolutely necessary. Now, midway through the second week of his journey, Folco saw in the distance just north of the road smoke rising from the ramshackle of a building. At first he thought it was some poor farmstead, owned by someone trying to etch out a life in the unforgiving wilderness. As he walked closer, he realized what he had spotted, for it wasn't a homestead at all, but, as he had heard before from travelers visiting the Prancing Pony, that the building was indeed the Forsaken Inn. This ramshackle of a place, half rotted by years of neglect, was alive with the most unsavory of patrons, by the looks of it, and Folco had always heard it was wise to stay clear of it, if ever he was in the vicinity of. So that is exactly what he did, and taking Billy off the road, he stayed clear from any prying eyes as best he could. Nothing came to bother Folco that evening. His seemingly slight detour worked in keeping him to a low profile. The next day, Folco arrived at the last bridge. The great stone bridge crossing what Folco could only gather was the Horwell. The bridge's large 3 arches spanning over the deep gorge. As it was midday, Folco paused for a quick lunch, and to ease his quivering stomach as he started to feel dizzy, peering over the side of the gorge and looking into the fast-flowing waters of the Horwell. The food had seemed to help, and taking a deep breath in and guiding Billy along, they crossed the old and weathered stones of the walkway. As he looked onward, he noticed what could only be the Trollshaws, as they were called, a vast, rough and rocky landscape, broken by patches of thick woodland. Folco had never seen one, but stories from his grandfather tell that the horrid brutes that make up this place its home lends to its name. Folco swallowed deeply at the thought of meeting a troll, and although he didn't say anything to Billy, he almost felt Billy thought the same. Folco kept to the road, and whenever nightfall was almost upon him, he would set up camp south of the road and away from the borders of the Trollshaws. Not that the south was any safer, for he knew everything outside of the safe confines of the hedge and bree or outside any of the villages were dangerous always. The fire now he set very low, just enough to warm up some water, his hands and his feet. He made sure Billy was close. He wouldn't want any passing troll to steal him away from a hearty meal. Although restful, Folco felt the uncanny feeling that he was being watched, but he had not seen nor heard of any creature or beast throughout. The next morning he was met with a slight drizzle of rain. Nothing serious, but enough to make the path muddied and slower to tread. By the end of the afternoon he came upon an unusually high hill south of the road. On top lay a mound of raised stones surrounded by large singular stones encircling it. Folco had no idea what it was, but he figured he'd keep to a safe distance and reach the far side of the hill, hopefully before nightfall set in. Folco found a small clearing just off the main road to the north. Not too far from it, mind you, as the start of the Trollshaws looming over ever presently a few hundred feet away. Folco began to set up camp in the wood to light a fire, when he felt something was amiss. A feeling of unease and darkness surrounded him. It wasn't the same as the ring he was wearing, but this was more of a primal in nature. Billy seemed uneasy as well, and Folco, grabbing his spear, readying his bow, bid Billy to stay, as Folco carefully made his way towards the edge of the Trollshaw. Not but 100 feet from camp, Folco saw it. Strewn across the muddied and dirty ground were the remnants of a camp, and what appeared to be a bloodied battle. The light of dusk was enough to see the splatters of pools of dirt-soaked blood, the breaking of arrows, smashing of a sizable horse-pulled cart. The footprints about were that of dwarves, Folco thought, and something else, large and unbooted. A thought came across his mind, and he shuddered at the thought, as he realized a troll had to be near. As he surveyed the scene, he followed a trail leading deeper into the wood, and whether it was his hobbit curiosity to see a troll in real, or to find out what happened, he didn't know. Carefully, he inched his way forward, spear at the ready, as he pulled back the branches of the trees ahead. He immediately turned his head back. the sight of what he saw causing him to urge and almost eject the previous meal that he had in his stomach. Folco took in a deep breath and regained his wits about him, and, looking again, he could not understand how such a creature, troll or otherwise, could do such a thing as he saw. Before him lay the dismembered remains of 3 dwarves, with just the torso remaining and the heads remaining intact. Looking around further, Folco saw their arms and legs all strewn about. Falco's spirit was dampened, and he felt the cold darkness and presence of his ring now starting to clench around him. Taking in a deep breath and focusing on the task at hand, he shrugged off the encroaching darkness. He hadn't the time nor the tools to properly attend to the bodies. He didn't know the customs of the doors well enough to know how best to go about it anyway. He would remember this place, however, and if ever he found out how best to, he would return to set this poor man to rest. A large, booming sound of wood being splintered and cracked echoed throughout the area, Folco now bending low and out of sight. Ahead, down what appeared to be a trail made by the would-be troll, and Folco ever so carefully went down it. Despite the low light of dusk, Folco clearly could see the trail left by the troll. The footprints seemed to almost pop out from the surrounding dirt, almost as if there was some sort of luminescence to it. He had no trouble in seeing the tracks, even as he traveled further into the canopy of the wood, and all around him the shadow of the night encroached. What is it that was helping his vision? He could not know. Was it the ring, he wondered? Folco had followed the trail, but then suddenly lost it, as the ground turned from the soft vegetated ground of a forest floor to the hardness of rock. Folco crouched low and behind some brush, breathing slowly and deeply, as quietly as possibly could, careful not to let the tip end of the spear or the bow slung across his back to scrape against the hard rock. Suddenly, out of nowhere, off to the side and over a rock outcropping, Folco heard the breaking and moving of wood again against stone. As he had opened his eyes more to let in more of the dim light of dusk, he saw it. Peering out over the ledge, he saw the bald head of a large humanoid creature. As the creature lumbered out over, it peered from side to side, and then looked back to whatever hole it crawled out of. It was a large creature, muscular shoulders and arms, but a bulbous torso that protruded out over a tattered and dirty loincloth-type garment. Its legs, arms, and feet were bare, but covered in coarse, scraggly hair. It took in a deep breath and was about to move when suddenly the wind shifted, and it started to sniff about the air. Folco sensed it could smell him as he clenched the spear tighter, but still lay motionless like a rock on solid footing. Folco could only guess what it was, as he had never seen one before, but only heard through stories told. But the creature, only a short distance away, was a stone troll. Folco smiled, but then realized he was in serious danger, as he knew these creatures were not to be messed with, especially one so close to their holes. He waited, therefore, waited for his chance to sneak back away and down towards the road where Billy awaited. The troll now sniffed some more, but then grunted and turned around and slumped back down into its hole, as Folco heard more breaking and scraping of wood against rock, with the occasional growl from deep within. Folco could only wager it was doing something within its hole, making it bigger, fortifying it, or whatever else trolls do within their own. Folco took the opportunity to vacate, and that he did, without the slightest sound being made. Folco, as fast as he could while still being as stealthily as possible, made his way back to Billy, still waiting for him like a seasoned sentry guarding a castle gate. "Quick, Billy, and as quietly as possible. Let's head further east into the south side of the road. A troll lurks above." Billy nodded, but heeded Folco's command and did not neigh as he normally would have. The two climbed back onto the road and down over the opposing side of the embankment with which the road rested on. An hour passed, and Folco, and under the now light of the rising moon, and feeling that he was a safe distance away from the troll, made camp for the night. Folco dared not light a fire this night, and pulling out his heavy wool blanket, rested up against Billy for warmth. The next morning came without incident. and the sun, rising over the now visible and numerous peaks of the misty mountains, off to the distance, awakened Folco. Folco gazed at the wondrous view, as the sun now cast its yellowish-red rays of light down into the slopes of the mountains, and into the main foothills and valleys throughout. Without knowing it, Folco set himself up on a high ridge, and was able to see far out over many leagues. A large river flowed from northeast to southwest, and Folco thought to himself that this must be the Loudwater, with its headwaters flowing from the high up in the misty mountains, and then joining the Horwell to flow then into the Greyflog, on its way to the sea. Folco smiled and was now more excited than ever, as he realized he was close. If his assumptions to the answer of the riddle given to him by Bilbo, Rivendell lay somewhere east of the Loudwater, amongst the many deep valleys in the foothills, and high moors west of the misty mountains. Smiling, Folco turned to Billy. "Come now, Billy, we're almost there." The two, unlikely of companions this far east of Bree, now back on the road and keeping to a good pace, made their way to the river. We'll continue the journeys of Folco Hornblower next time. If you like the story and the content I'm creating, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Check out the other videos I'm creating called Riddles in the Dark, as I attempt to learn and describe the rules of the One Ring RPG for new players and old of the game. Again, thank you for watching. Cheers.